Thank you. So I won't be talking about science, I'll be talking about how to build scale in institutes. As indicated, I was the director of CRANN to about 4 or 5 months ago, so I stepped back. And in fact, I have given talks at many locations about how you build scale in institutes. It turns out it's not easy to do. And in fact, it's challenging regardless of where you are, whether you're in the US or in Europe or Ireland. So building scale and international visibility is a very difficult challenge. So there's 2 parts to this talk. The first part is to tell you a little bit about CRAN, about what it is, what it does, and how it got to where it is now. And then the second part of the talk will pose the problem, how do you build institutes of scale? How do you get the strategic alignment to develop scale? How do you operate in your environment? What are your ambitions? And what's expected of an institute, from our perspective at least, to have the kind of scale and impacts required to get the level of funding to meet the aspirations you have. Okay, so let me just kick off and say in a snapshot what CRAN is. CRAN is a centre of excellence for nanoscience, at least it was initially. In fact, now I would say to you, CRAN is a centre of excellence for materials technologies. Okay, and why would I say that to you? I said because actually we realized that industry didn't understand nanoscience. And so when you talk to industry, you have to talk the same language. And so nanoscience is the science of small materials. And to make small materials, you have to engineer them to small sizes. And so we now say that in fact, actually that nanoscience is the ultimate in engineering, where you engineer down to single atom sizes. So even in the name or how you position yourself is very important. Getting away with nanoscience when you talk to industry just does not work. But that's our strength. Our strength is materials expertise and small materials at that. It's a partnership of 3 universities, Trinity College Dublin, University College Cork and the Royal College of Surgeons. We work in a range of different areas. Some of them spin electronics, device scaling, sensing, very ICT focused. Then we work in the energy area, but we also look at opportunities in the area of biodiagnostics, and more basically to map onto the environment in Ireland, the opportunities in the area of medical devices. We have 34 investigators. There's about 300 or so people. We have a significant technical staff, of which I'll say more about. We have a very large collaborative network. We're linked with over 100 European universities. And we have ongoing engagements with over 130 industry partners. Some of them are very large. By large, I mean more than $1 million or 2 per year. Or it could be maybe just 50K and it might last 6 months or 9 months, okay? We've been very successful in bringing in funding, and we've taken a very national focus on this. The total commitment is approaching €1/3 of €1 billion over the past decade or so. Our building and infrastructure is over €50 million. The funding of our PIs at a fundamental level between SFI and European funding is about 125 million. The CSETs, as they were called, these industry-facing activities, which was to build an interface between our researchers and the world outside, actually is funded between these 2 on the order of about 90-some million. AMBER is as I'll show you later, is Advanced Materials and Bioengineering Research Centre. And so it shows that we've taken CRAN, which had a very large ICT focus at birth. Over the last several years, we've trained that focus to seeing how are the materials we're using now for Intel, how can we take those same materials and sell them to somebody else? You have to sell and resell, because in fact your ability to make new things is limited. You have a finite capacity. So rather than plowing one very deep furrow, you have to look to jump to the next furrow and to find the next opportunities. So it's all about diversification, but diversification is based on a core knowledge of real expertise, and I'll talk about some of those examples. Okay, so what is CRAN? It's not what it was 10 years ago. It's now an institute. It's a Trinity College Institute, and actually it's not even funded anymore, because in fact SFI in its wisdom no longer funds these previous centres. But CRAN as an institute is made up of a bunch of centres. And so for instance we have Inspire. We're all partners of Inspire. Inspire was a CRAN-led initiative to provide access throughout the country to enabling measurement technologies for looking at materials. And so TEM, SEM, helium ion, all that stuff. We led the national initiative. It was 35 million euros, of which Trinity got something like 7 or 8 million, and UCD got some large slice, and it went all around the country. But we led that initiative, and we branded that initiative. We interfaced this entity here with the HEA and the funding bodies to provide the proper governance structure and oversight so people would have confidence in investing in Inspire. Your job is to make sure when people give you money, that the people giving you money have confidence in the governance structures you put in place, and that they can trust you with the money and that you deliver. And in fact, actually, I would say most of the failings of centres in Ireland is because the governance is terrible, that they don't deliver what they're supposed to deliver, and that there's no transparency whatsoever. So governance, transparency, and delivering is very important. And if you do that, you can have the respect of your stakeholders. We also jointly run CCAM, which is the Collaboration or Competence Centre in Applied Nanotechnology. This is an activity where industry poses questions to the centre. It's jointly run with Tyndall National Labs. And the community then responds. This is the research providing organisations respond to see if they can provide solutions to those industry-posed problems. It's another national centre. We, as I said, we also lead AMBER, which is the Advanced Material and Bioengineering Research Centre. And we will also, this is not the logo, there will be a centre for National Centre for Electron Microscopy, which was recently funded, which will have the world's best arboration corrected TEM, and it'll be on site in CRAN in about 18 months or so. We've led all these initiatives, we put in place the governance structures. It's very important to make sure that the leadership, the individuals leading these entities are responsible. And it's very important to understand what the roles of the various directors are. So governance is very important. It sounds boring, but actually you need to give people confidence in your governance structures before they give you money, and certainly before you get money the second time. Okay. But I should say to you that in fact all of this activity, much of which is outward industry facing, is based on a bedrock of fundamental world-class research funded through SFI, the frameworks, and the ERC. I mean, we have, in fact, in our institute, more ERC recipients than actually any other institute in Europe, believe it or not. And we have, in fact, a quarter of the total ERC recipients in Ireland. So the people that we've partnered with to form CRAN are actually world-class experts. And if you look at Ireland's rankings of 6th and 8th in nanomaterial science, you'll find that 70 or 80% of the publications that underlie those rankings all are affiliated with CRAN. And so we've driven the agenda nationally. We are responsible for the profile Ireland has, and we take that responsibility seriously. And actually, responsibility is a really big word. Okay, so let me just say a bit about the CRAN Amber Centre, or CRANBER, or whatever you want. We have an interesting challenge now of branding, but I won't go there. Anyway, so the bottom line is we're working with industry, we're working with clinicians, we're working with researchers across a whole range of different institutions to look at materials that are actually important for a range of different sectors. And these sectors are industry technologies, like how do you make materials that industry wants, sometimes in large quantities. I mean, how do you actually design materials that are suitable for implants, and what's required of those materials, and how can you make those materials smart? So if you have a hip implant, maybe the stresses on that implant are too much, and ultimately the implant will fail. How do you actually make a smart implant? And those are things that are not beyond the kinds of capabilities. And of course we're also working in the biopharma space, but trying to look at actually packaging technologies and also looking at simple delivery systems. The barriers in this area are very large. I mean, we understand this, and so we try to find opportunities where we can be closer to market, and we can avoid a lot of the regulatory issues that plague researchers engaging in these areas. Okay. Just to give you a sense of the scale of AMBER, it's funded for, over the next 6 years, for 58 million euros. It's the largest grant Trinity College ever got. 23 million is coming from industry, 9.4 or 5 million in cash. That's a lot of money. When we began 10 years ago, it was hard to see, you couldn't get a nickel from industry. They give you in kind, but they wouldn't put money on the table. But now, the scale of our engagement is quite significant. For instance, you take one partner, Intel. When we worked with Intel, 10 years ago, they would maybe put someone on the ground or give you access to facilities. But there was nobody in Ireland working in R&D in Intel Ireland. Now there's 300 people in Intel Ireland working in R&D. Now we can't claim credit for all of that, but actually we work on a daily basis with the people that design the next generation computer chips. Are we actually helping them with the design? No, we're not. We're advising them about where they should be 5, 7, 10 years out. What are the materials that can provide additional benefits to their technologies? And we do that by competing with other companies, research providing organizations, whether it's Stanford or Berkeley or whatever. You have to compete. And so you have to understand, just because you're in Ireland and there's some little cocoon of funding here, in the big bad world out there, if you want to work with real companies who have a real position in the world, you have to compete with all the other potential research providing organizations, and you have to win. Competing is not good enough. And so we've had to face down Stanford, and we've lost a few. We had a win over Berkeley a few months ago, but that's just life. That's the front line. But you have to do it based on real science, real ability to innovate and do something different. It's not about technology. These companies know all about technology. They can teach me about technology, but they don't understand the physical material science that's required for future generation products. Okay. So when you tell any story of an institute, there are components. There's 4 directions, this compass. It always has to be about finding the best people in the world you can find. This means we're a small country, so you have to have the capacity to attract the best people to Ireland. This is very challenging, okay? And so you have to do sometimes extraordinary things, which means maybe sit down with your president or your provost and say, actually you have to do this. And insist on, we make an offer to this person over here that just won an ERC, and bring them back to Ireland because this is the right place for them. And someone has to facilitate that. So in fact, you have to have strategic alignment between what the university wants to do and what you want to do. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the right people, you can forget about all the rest. Because the reason a company wants to work with you is the relationship you develop, or they develop, with your people. And it's a one-on-one relationship. And the strength of a relationship is if the partner comes back again and again to ask you more questions and to invest more money in your research activities. And so our goal has always been to find the best people in the world, link it with the best infrastructure we can get, develop a national and international reputation for world-class science, and then develop a model with the outside world that lets us successfully engage. Actually, developing these models is very difficult. Why? Because actually the people over here, they actually want to do world-class science. And so if you bog them down with stupid, trivial industry problems, they'll get disillusioned and they'll just walk away. So you have to make sure your industry engagement is of high value and really enables your PIs to do something quite different and better than they could before. You also have to ensure that you have the capacity to do some of the grunge work that industry will throw your way. Because it's about building relationships. I mean, an industry partner may ask you a question today and you think, my God, who the hell wants to do that? I can do it, but do I really want to do it? But you take the long view. You say, okay, well look, what's the potential position with this company? Can we down the road think about actually a much larger area? In fact, if I look at the technology that underpins the success of this company, where do I think I can make a play? Now, they're not asking me today about it, but I'm going to keep an eye on it because I want to actually maybe put a chip down now, make an investment with a view on the longer game, that ultimately at the end of the day there'll be big money down the road where I can get my PIs involved in that research. But in the short term, you need technical support to help you do the grunge stuff, because if you ask your PIs to do it, if you ask your graduate students to do it, it's not fair. Your graduate students are here to learn about world-class science. It is, to me, inconceivable that we have graduate students working with industry that does not ask high-value, high-level problems. And I will draw the line there every time. Students should never be doing that. You're to grow your mind and think wonderful thoughts. Okay. Okay, so just to give you a sense, we've worked hard to bring in researchers from all around the world. When we advertise internationally, this is our goal. So we have researchers from over 45 different countries. we have a governance structure where the people that advise us are world-class experts in the areas we need. So some of them you may or may not recognize, but for instance, if I look over here, Sir Keith Nines is the rector of Imperial College, and so he also was in charge of all DoD funding in the UK. Richard Friend Sir Richard Friend actually spun out Plastic Logic as a company, and so he knows all about making transistors. These guys over here are really world's experts in material science. And of course we also have local people here who are actually quite influential. Sean Dorgan, the former CEO of the IDA, and Eamon Sinnott, who would be, for instance, the plant manager for Intel here in Ireland. Your advisors are very important. Why? Because actually, it's important to understand that there's conversations you can't have. We're scientists, okay? So if the funding agency is behaving badly or the government's behaving badly, you can't go up to Leinster House or Wilton House and poke someone in the nose. But you need somebody who can actually do that for you. And so you need people, and you use these people to knock on doors and, if necessary, batter down doors. And if you really want the best battering ram you possibly can have is your industry partners. Intel employs 6,000-7,000 people here in Ireland, and for every Intel employee, there's about 3 or 4 times the number of service companies that are working with Intel on these blue badge bases. It's a huge cohort. The government, SFI, they cannot afford to piss off Intel. And so if in fact there's a problem, you sit down and you calmly talk about the problem to Intel and you ask them, does this seem reasonable to you, and are you willing to go and sit down with the interested parties and try to move this matter forward? There is no point whatsoever in you having that conversation. You will not win it, and you're putting yourself in a position where you'll compromise everything you're doing. But that's the value of relationships, and that industry partnership is hugely important for that. And of course, the bottom line is you do all of this because you want, and your PIs want, to have that international recognition. They have their own career ambitions, and your institute must be a vehicle for realizing their ambitions. If it is not a vehicle for doing so, they will simply pull out. I mean, why should they? I mean, why should any PI help me to realize some vision that I have or someone else has that they don't buy into, that doesn't in fact benefit their career? It has to be aligned, and so aligning these strategies is very important. I'll say a little bit more about that later on. So for us, infrastructure is key. And so we have this building here, which you've probably seen. You know, it really has been a magnet for attracting really good people. Now I would say in UCD you're blessed. You have a greenfield site, more or less, getting less green. In fact, when I was here, there was no buildings, but it was concrete. But it's greened up a bit, but there's actually a lot of room for further expansion. You're extraordinarily lucky. Trinity is city locked, and it's hugely problematic. And so our facilities were just unacceptable. And in fact, actually, when we got our first centre funded, when they gave us a cheque for 20 million euros and said, here's the cheque to do the science, we gave them back the cheque. We said, no, we don't want the cheque. Didn't you read the proposal? We said we want the building and the money to do the science. And so there was a Mexican standoff. Provost was doing his nut, okay? But the reality was we won at the end of the day, and we built this building, okay, with the help from Martin Naughton and others. But the reality is, without infrastructure, you can't do world-class science. Having built the building, we got lots of applications from people around the world who wanted you So you're hugely advantaged here. The facilities at UCD are really excellent compared to Trinity in general, and so I think you don't have to worry on this point. We've actually expanded beyond this building. We have a second building down by Grand Canal Dock in the TTEC, which is our technology centre, and we're expanding there as well. Okay. We have very modest facilities, okay? We work with Intel, and this is our clean room. I mean, when Intel see this, they laugh, okay? But actually what we do is Intel doesn't just give us money, they give us people. And so we have their technical people run our clean rooms. So it's run professionally. God knows we're terrible at it. Okay? But we have Intel running our clean rooms. So in fact we can develop processes that when they work, we can transfer them to Intel. And in fact in about 2 to 3 years time, the next laptop you buy will have technology that was developed in this clean room. In fact, when you turn off your laptop, and you open it back up again, it will actually be where you left it off. In fact, it'll have non-volatile memory forever. And that's based on the technology that we've developed. A technology Intel knew nothing about, and we worked for about 4 or 5 years now transferring that technology, but it was done in this, it was developed in this clean room. Okay. We also have, in fact, an advanced microscopy lab. This is the facility which many of you may, and more of you should, access. It's available on an open access basis. It's down near the Grand Canal dock. It provides really world-class facilities. I mean, I've gone around the world. It turns out that actually we've done something quite special because we had no baggage. We started from zero. So we could say, if you could wish what you wanted, what would you really need? And so we could talk about making quite good choices in terms of instrumentation to provide the capabilities that we need to do world-class science. And the suite of tools available to us actually would be unique. You wouldn't find them in Harvard because they have probably have 15 of these but none of these, and so on. And as I say, we have a new TM capability that will be online in the next 18 months to 2 years. And of course, all of these facilities are available on National Access Program. And so this open access is very important for us. This is all about governance again. We had to make sure that the costing structure, that in fact was such, and that our books were sufficiently transparent so that when you write a grant to SFI or to whoever, you can put in access to these facilities as a direct cost. Because our books have been audited and we're very transparent in how we fund the centre, and so the government has confidence in allowing you to request access to our facilities, in which case we're able to support a national facility by engaging with the broader community of researchers all around Ireland, and in fact all around Europe. We have people through Uminifab and QNano accessing these facilities as well. Okay. So as I said, for instance, this is our ranking, and as I said, we are responsible for much of the good ranking that Ireland has in areas that pertain to CRAN. As I say, 4 of the top 5, 7 of the top 10, 14 of the top 20 papers are all attributable to CRAN and its partner schools, and so we really do drive the rankings nationally here in Ireland. As I say, we have a huge selection of companies, 130 or so. We're constantly looking for ways to repackage what we do and sell it to different companies. We are very specific about how we engage with companies. All our agreements are based on field of use, okay? So for instance, suppose I take one material technology. If I take graphene, for instance. Graphene, as you know, comes from graphite. It's a single layer of graphite. So it's a sheet of material. And so we've developed technologies for exfoliating that in large quantities. And we have a company that's put a lot of money into CRAN to exfoliate this, not by the beakerful, but by the truckload. And literally we are at points where the volumes we're talking about are thousands of litres. So that's one engagement. We have other companies that want to use graphite for other possibilities. For instance, so that particular company has the right to the IP, the background IP, as it relates to making large quantities of graphite using our technique. However, we take that graphite, now that they've done it, and now we actually incorporate it into different materials. And so we might work with, say, like a company that makes catheters and balloons for catheters. And we would strengthen those balloons by incorporating those sheet materials into the balloon. As it turns out 1 in every 15 inflation of a balloon inside a human body goes pop. It's probably very disconcerting for the poor person who's having the stent inserted. But if 6 or 7% of the time the balloon actually goes pop, there's a severe problem with the balloon to get the stent to open up. And so the reality is you need better balloons, and we're making better balloons by incorporating these 2D materials into them. But they only have rights in the area of making balloons for stents. We've taken that same material technology and we've sold it to a beer maker who are now using that technology to make plastic beer bottles. You probably know, I don't know whether you've ever tasted skunky beer. It tastes terrible. Unlike carbonated beverages like Coke, you can get Coke in a plastic beer bottle or plastic bottle and it's fine for weeks on end, months even. But the problem with beer is there's sulfites in beer, and if the oxygen gets in there you get H2S and it tastes terrible. And the shelf life currently of beer in a plastic bottle is about 2 weeks. The commercial shelf life in any bottle has to be at least 6 months. However, if you can sell beer in a beer bottle, it's a complete paradigm shift, because now you can sell beer at places like, well, you can sell in a bottle in a place like a football game or a soccer game. At the moment you can't do that with glass, because if people start throwing glass onto a field, bad things happen. And of course, the cost for transportation goes down dramatically. And so we have a large activity now with this company trying to solve this problem of plastic beer bottles. And it's a huge market, but they only have rights for beer. We're selling the same technology to a food company because it's a barrier layer material. We want to make better wrappers for foods, for the right kinds of important foods that really care about the shelf life. So it's all about doing what you do well, but making sure you work with different partners who are in different furrows, and you have well-defined field of use IP agreements that are very specific. Otherwise, you can't possibly do what you need to do. It's use and reuse as many times as you can. When you have a good idea, you don't get too many really good ideas often in life, and you have to make the best of every single one. So there's a lot of companies and there's a lot of stories that go like this, and you'll be falling asleep if I go through them. We also work, very strongly in Europe. I mean, we've invested in people that help us to be successful in Europe. I mean, in 2013, we worked with 96 companies all across Europe, and this brings in a lot of money. On an average year, we pull in European funding somewhere between 4 to 7 or 8 million. It depends on whether we hit ERC grants in the same year or not. Okay? But the numbers are healthy. We will be expanding more as we go into 2020. But we invested in people to allow our PIs to be much more successful, not only in writing grants, but also in finding networks of partners to be successful when you go into the grant rounds. And so our success rates are really quite high. But that's because we invested in people who've refined the way we write our proposals, and we got better and better over time. We also have a very large collaborative network. At any given time, we're publishing with about 207 universities around the world in any given year. This is very important for us, because at the end of the day, it's all about raising the profile of CRAN and the Institute and making sure there's an awareness of the research that's going on. And the way you do that is you make sure that you're well connected around the world. And so this is a very important part of our mandate. So I want to just say a few words about the importance of industry engagement. The bottom line is that industry is in a very difficult position at the moment. I mean, competition is enormous. If you haven't noticed, in the last 10 years, the world has changed, and it's irreversible. In the last 10 years, between India and China, you have about 4 to 5 billion people that have come online. Okay? Suddenly these people want a slice of the pie. Suddenly this large cohort of individuals have aspirations to real innovation. They're making significant investments. And the reality is that, in fact, industry is under enormous competition. So much so that years gone by, where they had the margins and the profit levels to be able to think about, projecting, looking at R&D spend over the next 5 and 10 years, they no longer have that luxury. So regardless of the sector, companies now are looking to universities to share that risk. Now, this is an opportunity, but it's also a huge challenge. There are some risks you don't want to share. But there are real benefits to open innovation for universities if you engage with the right companies and you engage at the right level, so there's a benefit back to the actual university. But it's not just about money. I mean, money is just something that flows around the place, okay? It's not just money. I mean, what working with industry can do, if the partnership is good, it can help you contextualize what you do. It amazes me how many people doing research don't actually know the problem they're working on. Well, they say they do, okay? And they say it's important because of X, Y, and Z. But if you drill down even at a modest level, you'll find actually this person doesn't understand the technology, doesn't understand the real issues, and doesn't understand the performance required to have a real impact. So i.e. the work you can publish, sure you can publish anything, but is it going to have any really material impact? Probably not. And now maybe you don't care. Maybe it's just about activity. But unfortunately the capacity to fund activity is very challenging unless the activity in itself is such a paradigm shift from what we're thinking about that it opens up whole new vistas for a university and for society at large. So we are challenged to be relevant. And so the important thing is to make sure that you are relevant and that you can contextualize what you do in terms of real world problems, which means you actually need to know something about these problems other than what you just read about them. Because I can tell you that I would say to my PIs that when you write a paper and that BS in the first paragraph as to why this thing is so important that you put so much stock into, I want you to think about how is it that CRAN can make you realize why what you're doing is important and how it will deliver as you said it will deliver in the first paragraph of your paper. Because we need to put the facilities in place to try to ask the questions, okay, we developed this material or this technology, is it really going to have an impact? Well, can we measure that? In academia, oftentimes you're throwing those ideas over the wall and you don't ever seek to ask, can we measure that? The role of an institute, from my perspective, is to provide a vehicle to test whether those ideas, those concepts, are actually providing the value that we set out to provide. And it's incumbent on us to do this. Because at the end of the day, we are public institutions and we're responsible to the public purse. So it really does help contextualize what you do. It provides real, actual specifications to critical technologies. Now, what's the number? You know, we want to make something good. Well, how good? What exactly is the number, the performance required for this technology to have the impact that you claim it's going to have? Actually, it's surprising. In general, those numbers are not known. And so when you sit down with industry, you can say, okay, for this technology, will this material work? And what do you want from this material? And then the next technology, what would you need? It's only from having those hard numbers you can actually understand, am I making progress? You may be moving your number on, it may look better, but it may be so far off the mark that it's completely irrelevant. It's actually nice to know what is relevant. And industry has those numbers, and they're not generally available in the outside world because, in fact, it's oftentimes a secret. I think it's very important that you could become part of the story of industry success. I mean, I told you about Intel started off with nobody in Ireland doing R&D, but now there's 300 people in Ireland doing R&D linked in Intel. Now, Intel has bought small companies in Ireland. They've bought Havoc. They've bought small companies now that are actually making microprocessors. In fact, Intel, for the first time ever in Ireland, is producing their own microprocessors, ever. It's now won a competition over the premier place for microprocessor design, which is Israel, and is providing next generation processors for particular applications, which it never did before. So our goal as an institute is to help the companies around us raise their ambitions for what they can be when they grow up. We are actually hugely advantaged in Ireland. Ireland is completely unique, because I mean, I've given this talk all around the world, but Ireland is unique. It's unique because there was a time 10, 15 years ago that 40 cents on every dollar that left the US to be invested in Europe came to Ireland. 40 cents on every dollar. That's a staggering number. And it means you have a large cohort of multinational companies here who are doing world-class manufacturing. And they're very important to their parent organizations, mainly in the US. But however, for each of those organizations, they realize with the emergence of India and the Far East China, there is an enormous problem. The problem is the cost of labor. So there's enormous pressure on all these organizations in Ireland to actually remain viable. And it's really bad in the area of software. I mean, software is vaporware. At least if Intel was to move, they've invested, actually the Intel campus has received, I think, 15 billion euro investment so far There's a quietly going on now out at the moment, saying nothing to nobody. There's almost a €2 billion investment going on now in Intel and Leakslip, and they're not telling anybody. They haven't announced it, they're just doing it. Why? Because they're concerned about the adverse publicity, because there's a site in the US that's on hold. But the Irish site's going ahead. But the reality is all of those organizations are scared about costs. And so unless those organizations can become mission critical to their corporations, there will come a point in time where it makes economic sense, whether it's closing down Intel or whatever, and moving it to somewhere where it's cheaper to manufacture. The only way you can prevent that, the only way, is to make sure that in fact some of the fundamental R&D that's mission critical to that organization is being delivered locally here in Ireland. That's the only way. And that's our mission. And so we have people who are industry liaison people who go knock on door to door. We visit hundreds of companies. We say, hi, we're from CRAN, and we think you need us. And they usually say, buzz off. And what we do is we say, okay, well, we looked at your technology. We think we can help this problem. And we put down an Enterprise Ireland voucher worth 5K and say, there's 5K. You spend that with us and we'll solve a problem for you. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the vouchers sit there. Oftentimes they come back and say, actually, you know, we have a problem. We'd like to know what's going on at this interface between these materials or whatever. We take the 5K, we get it from Enterprise Ireland, and we have some of our tech support do some initial studies, and then we usually point out and say, actually, that's not the problem. Boy, you've got a much bigger, it's like going to the mechanic. Say, oh, I think I have a problem with my tires. It's not just the tires, you know, the whole car's falling apart. But actually you can have that conversation and you build a relationship. But that's how you do business. But there has to be people whose job it is to do this. Certainly our PIs aren't going to do it. But the bottom line is you can become an important part of the success story. Because our mission, at least our mission at CRAN, is to transform the operations of companies in Ireland so they're doing credible world-class R&D that sustains their organizations locally, and if it's a multinational company, it actually betters the position of the multinational. And that's really important to us. But there are other stories. I mean, students, there's lots of students here. Students are really important. I mean, you have to understand that you guys are the infectious agents we sent out to companies and around the world to spread the news and to spread what you've learned. To give you a very good example of that, I mean, for instance, we weren't working with a company called Merck Millipore. We had no relationship with them. But Merck Millipore hired one of our students. And so he showed up and was looking how, now Merck Millipore make all the membranes for your wonderful separations, right? And was looking at the membrane technology and said, okay, and was watching how they process membranes and how they characterize membranes. And after being there about 3 or 4 months, he said, you know, what are you guys doing? And so we had a conversation about the membrane process, which is it's an old technology. And the lack of selectivity of the process, and the way they were characterizing the membranes. And the long and the short of it was that we ended up going to Merck Millipore and talking to them about polymers, which they know more than we know about, but we measure them better than they do. And we understand some of the inversion chemistry and physics better than they do. And we talked to them about their technology and said, look, we think you should look at this. As the conversation evolved, they became more and more dependent on us. They actually were a small organization in Cork. They actually approached corporate. They had the confidence then to approach their own corporate headquarters and say, we'd like to grow the operation here. At the end of the day, business moved from Bedford, Massachusetts to Ireland. The Ireland site became the only center of excellence for membrane technologies in the company. And there's a large investment going on there now with a new pilot line for generating new kinds of membranes. That was one student taking a job, infecting an organization with his or her knowledge, and changing the dynamic, not just in the organization, but between that organization and the universities around it. And that's a really important role. This is your job. Your job is to be infectious and go out and make those connections. and keep on shouting UCD or whatever as you go on your journey, of course. Okay. And the student pipe, it's really important. You know, I mean, for instance, at the moment now, Intel has employed 35 PhDs. They're looking for 200 more. Okay? But there's a pipeline problem. It's not a faucet. We can't turn them on as much as we'd like to turn them on. And so the reality is that actually there's a big demand for the right kind of product. Not that I want to talk about students as product, but there is demand. And if you train people the right way, they will be received appropriately and they'll find really, really good paying positions. And of course, at the end of the day, you need to be able to measure these outcomes from the research activity and the institute activity, which is very, very important for industry and very, very important for the funding agencies who want to justify the next tranche of funding coming into them. And of course, really important is industry is a huge advocate for the funding in the university system. As I said to you before, there is no point in you advocating people should give you more money or treat you better. If you think you're not getting enough money, if you think you're not being treated well, you need to bring industry into the picture and have them sit down with the stakeholders and say, hang on guys, what's going on here is really critical for us. And by the way, we have 7,000 people employed. And by the way, we contribute this to the economy. And by the way, please sort this problem. That's a very convincing argument. Me beating on a table, I'll just go hoarse. And you will have the same problem as well. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into this because it's too long, but I just want to say that, in fact, an institute is a very complex environment. There's a lot of stakeholders. You have to manage all these relationships. I mean, you have PIs that are really mission critical. They drive, these are the engines that drive the whole activity. Of course, you have your PIs in the context that perhaps the institute doesn't provide faculty lines. And so perhaps the faculty lines reside in the schools. So you have to manage that dynamic. You cannot have your institute overshadow the schools. You have to make sure that there's shared success. And you have to make sure that, in fact, the schools understand the benefits of the institute in providing the ability to attract better PIs, having access to better facilities, and actually able to engage with industry and society in a way so that the school or the department becomes relevant in this engagement piece with industry or with society and with industry. And of course, the other very important stakeholders are the university and the funding agency. And of course, you want to have really good vertical alignment across those to make sure it works. Now, I'm not going to go through this. I have a bunch of other slides which talk about all the elements that I'm happy to talk to people separately about. I'm happy to provide you with the slides if you want. But I think given the audience we have, probably I've said enough. And I'm happy to take questions.